Hey folks, hope life has been treating you well with all its magnanimity. Today I would like to broach the subject of demographics once again, but not just limited to India, but the wider South Asian region. The reason I want to do this is because most demographic analyses of religious numbers in India, when making projections about the future, don't take into account the changing religious landscape of our neighboring countries, which have historically often had some impact or the other in our own territory. The infiltration of millions of Bangladeshi illegals, Rohingyas, the migration of minorities from Pakistan and Afghanistan, these are all instances where our internal religious demographics have been impacted by migration from neighboring countries. By not taking the demographic dynamics of our neighboring countries into account, many of our news outlets end up with incredibly rosy conclusions and use them to attack India's right wing for what they claim is needless alarmism about the growth of India's Muslim population. Apart from the fact that India's internal demographic balance may possibly be disturbed by migrations from outside, it should also be noted that existing demographic models of fertility transition have only been partly successful in plotting the change in total fertility rates in Sunni Muslim populations across the world, and it can likely be argued that a conventional fertility rate transition, even though it might apply to Indian Hindus, may not be the correct predictor of the future total fertility rates of the Indian Muslim population. There are many examples to support this hypothesis that Sunni Muslim populations are more resistant to conventional fertility rate transitions. One example is Tunisia, where the total fertility rate hit a low of 1.99 in 2005, but has since then bounced back up to 2.17 in 2018, above the replacement level once again. Similarly, Egypt's total fertility rate fell to a low of 3 in 2008, but then went up to 3.5 by 2014, before declining a bit again to rest at 3.1 by 2017, basically meaning that Egypt's TFR has remained almost exactly at the same spot for close to a decade. An example closer to home of how conventional demographic models have missed the mark by a large margin is in Pakistan. The UN had originally predicted that Pakistan would have a population of 197 million people by 2017, while the CIA World Factbook estimated that it would touch 202 million in that year. Both were wrong by a margin of more than 10 million, as the Pakistan census of 2017 showed that the country's population had touched a whopping 212.7 million people. The reason behind these gross miscalculations was simple. International organizations and statisticians simply applied conventional models of fertility transition to Pakistan without accounting for the elephant in the room, Islam. But even if we went by the conservative projections about the growth of Islam in the Indian subcontinent, such as those given by Pew Research Center, we reach startling conclusions. For one, Pew estimates that by 2050, India will have 311 million Muslims, Pakistan will have 273 million Muslims, Bangladesh will have 182 million Muslims, and Afghanistan will have 72 million Muslims. Add these numbers up and compare them with the total population projections of these four countries by Pew, and 37% of the inhabitants of these four countries will be Muslim by 2050. That is up from just 32% in 2010 according to Pew's own numbers. But it gets a whole lot worse. We already know for a fact that Pew's projection is at least partly an underestimate, thanks to data from Pakistan's census 2017, which showed that the country already had a population of over 212 million by that year, while Pew had estimated that Pakistan's total population would be 208 million by 2020, and that their Muslim population would be 200 million by that same year. More updated projections by the UN from 2019 give an estimate of a whopping 338 million people in Pakistan by 2050, far higher than Pew's original estimate of 283 million Pakistanis by that year. Just by correcting this one metric, we now end up with almost 40% of the total population of these four countries being Muslim by 2050. Incredibly enough, The percentage of Muslims in undivided India in 1941 was just 24.3%, or when we include Afghanistan, about 26%. From 26% to 40% in a span of less than 110 years. And that too, folks, with somewhat conservative figures, because remember, even now the projections are still assuming that Muslim TFR will somehow fall below the replacement level of 2.1 and stay there. If that doesn't happen for a sustainable period of time, then we may as well be looking at the Muslim population reaching a few points higher than 40% by 2050 and likely reaching more than 60% of all childbirths in the subcontinent by that year. If that happens, then the fate of the Hindus and other non-Muslim populations of the subcontinent will be all but sealed by the end of the century. With that, we'll wrap things up, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe to the channel and push the bell icon to stay updated.